Well, welcome back, guys. So what was that like to have to highlight in a positive tone, like your selling points or your brand? What was that like?
After the excitement of last week's, future self exercise, it was kind of easy, and I was somewhat energized by last week's to be able to put forth some good positive things.
That's awesome. What about you, Sarah?
Yeah. Well. So, I told Robin, so this week something exciting happened. Today I got my official state filing for my LLC. Woo! So it's real and it's happening. It's so neat. But then we got to this. Thank you.
High five.
Yay.
Yeah.
But now it's like, oh, how am I going to sell myself? There's so many things I want to include and do. And so it's really like eye-opening to kind of see how I'm going to combine it all. And what yeah, but it's all really exciting. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. So both Sarah and Robin felt like it was a really positive thing. They were energized. Mike, what about you?
Yeah, I think it was fun. I enjoy talking about the business aspect of this, and I'm energized by that part of it. And I think Kellen and I had a lot of similarities. We talked about the extent to which you integrate or separate your personality from your business identity. And we thought that in coaching, it's probably a much closer connection than it is if you were in some other business, because you're effectively selling to a large degree yourself. But it's also to talk about not just about you. It's important to talk about the pain points on the part of your client that you're going to be addressing through this work and what the outcomes of that work are going to be. So I really enjoy talking about this part of it. I hope we can do more of it.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and I'm actually going to give you guys homework from the Build Your Life's work. It's step 6. It's about brand, and there's some really good questions. And it's kind of on the premise that, this is what I believe in my own coaching journey is life coaching comes out of your own life story. So it doesn't mean that, there's reasons why. I'm going to mute that. Sorry, there's some. It comes out of your own life story. And so the reason that I believe coaching works so well is because I experienced it myself. And this is what the impact was. So it's step 6 or chapter 6 of Build Your Life's work. It's on the materials page, but I'll put it right here in the chat for you guys. But it's some really good questions, such as, imagine you're at a dinner party and someone asks you about your story, your past, and what brought you to coaching. What would you say? If you were a superhero, what would be your origin story? Things like that. Like how you came to be, how you arrived at coaching. So that's going to be something I'm going to have you guys go over this week. So just a few questions to ponder, but we're getting towards the end of class. We're at session 15, and out of 24. So let's do that this week. Even if it's just a couple questions you really ponder, and we'll do that all together. We'll take a couple minutes to discuss that. Did anyone have like negative self-talk as they were put on the spot like this? Did you notice at all that you went towards this is what you don't do, or where you don't have experience, anything like that?
I have, but let me make it clear.
All right, try talking now, Eddie. I turned up your video because I couldn't hear you. Are you still there, Eddie?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, what were you saying?
Yeah. Yeah, I have that inside conversation. the negative inside conversation. This only happened with me when I fell in something. I have a positive attitude in everything that I do, but when I fell, when I lost something, my negative conversations come in my mind, you know?
So when there's failure, that gives a little bit of room for that negative dialogue.
Exactly. You know, I start blame myself the why I felt that, why I did this, you know? But this is only come in my mind after I fell.
That makes sense. Yeah, and if we're like, especially, I have areas that I wouldn't say I'm like fluent in, certain things that might make me more uncomfortable. Sometimes we have less confidence that can open the door for negative dialogue. I know for me it is, just in anything that can really happen. Or if you're under stress, sometimes that opens the door for negative dialogue. The point I want to make is that a lot of you, since you had done Future Self, you had that hope uplifting you. And as we get into Inner Critic, that carried you into something that maybe could have been a high pressure, stressful, on the spot thing you had to do. Sometimes having that hope is, always, not just sometimes, it's really important. I see in the book sometimes it says that do the Future Self after Inner Critic. I'm a big fan of before, so I'm wondering if that's a typo, because that's what I've always been an advocate of, because then you have that hope to carry you, and you know what that feels like, and you can tap back into that. So as we get into Inner Critic, I want to encourage you all to remember what Future Self felt like, and really have your future self along with you in this exercise. So as we get into Inner Critic, this is really taking that negative self-talk and personifying it. It's where you can separate that negative self-talk from you. And so it's a distinct, separate, person. And it's silly. It's meant to be something small, something probably like cartoonish or silly. For example, so I can share other people's ones if they give me permission. Let's see. I have had one client hers was a miniature librarian who was always shushing her and holding around like a little list and glasses on the rim of her nose. And she ended up, after going through the exercise, to remind herself that, to tame her inner critic, she had a little sign said that no librarians here or something. She had a little librarian inner critic who was always shushing her. I was actually thinking of mine because I feel like I always change mine, but the one I've had, so I'm losing a lot of hair right now. My hair is falling out after having a baby. And it is so easy to think, oh, hair's never going to grow back. I've always had a lot of hair. And so it's really, really scary for me. I don't know. But I was like, I'm going to do this Future Self or the Inner Critic exercise by myself. And I decided that my inner critic was a big giant hairball. And it was hilarious. Now I'm just I'm a little bit laughing at it. It almost diffuses that negative dialogue when you're, and just as coaches, I'm never going to be able to get that client to where they want to be. That's where our own, negative dialogue can really take off and get in the way of progress, or we can personify it and deal with it. Another client, or clients, most everyone has an inner critic. If people say that they don't, they may not be ready for the exercise, because I have experienced people that say they don't. But everyone has that negative dialogue at some point. It might only show up in certain situations. I'm a big fan of this exercise, but you guys, I need to invite you to step into some silliness. Don't name, I had a client try and name their inner critic the attacker, you don't name it anything scary or aggressive. It's meant to be silly. So as you work with clients on this, you want to give them those rules. So kind of, it needs to be small. It needs to be silly. It needs to make you almost like feel lighter. So what would a rule be for them about that? Just even talking about it makes me want to giggle. That should be that way. It should be something where you take something that's probably serious negative self-talk that's tearing you down and almost repurpose your inner critic. So it's personified as this little character, and then you're able to repurpose it. So for example, my client that had the librarian, who's always like taking notes and glasses at the end of the nose and kind of like shushing her and scolding her, she turned her into like just a reminder. Oh, when inner critic shows up, I just need to check my to-do list. And so she was able to repurpose the inner critic, because you're not going to be able to get rid of your inner critic, but you can almost use your inner critic as a reminder or repurpose your inner critic. Now I'm thinking, how can I take better care of my hair? It's kind of funny, of what hair I do have. That's kind of a lighter inner critic. I feel like I definitely have other ones. Robin. You want to tell us about it? No. I wasn't judging. I was saying good for you.
Just a little glass, that's all. That's all I needed. But I just opened the comments and saw that, and I'm like, wait a minute.
It was almost like you were toasting, and it was.
I was, yes.
Kind of a one-off, but I can't really drink a whole lot of wine because baby. But I started drinking something called Soli water. So it's Himalayan pink salt, and so that's what I'm drinking. But seriously, I crave it now, and everyone thinks I'm nuts, but it's so good for you. Anyways, that's what I'm drinking, if you're wondering why my water's murky. in a wine glass. There's my... Anyways. All right. So what do you guys think of inner critic? What we've talked about so far?
There have definitely been times in my life that I've had a bigger inner critic than others. It's not always like really present, but sometimes it is a huge factor.
Yeah, and I would almost go further to say that you can have bigger ones in seasons of your life. You might have different ones for different areas of your life or different situations, right? Mike, what do you think?
Well, while you've been talking, I've just been trying to create that personification, and I'm not getting very far with it so far. But it's definitely there. It's just kind of like a source of doubt, when you're facing a challenge. For me, it's a lot of probably more often professional than interpersonal, but might also show up if I'm considering some kind of activity or goal, like a really long bike ride, or something related to kind of drastic exercise, maybe I'm walking a half marathon, for example, something like that. My wife asked me to do that, and the inner critic came up with, I don't know, I don't know if I can do that. But I want to think more about what the personification of that might be. It's an interesting exercise, but it's definitely there a lot, not that I'm plagued by doubt, but it's there for sure.
Right. Yeah, and it's helpful as we talk about with clients when they notice that maybe they doubt themselves, or when you're really frustrated, what do you notice, like the things that you might say to yourself? Or when you're frustrated or stressed, really get into those pain points, like when it really hits you, like, oh, I'm gonna fail at this, or I'm not gonna ever get better at this, like those limiting beliefs, which we're gonna talk about very soon too. So doubt is definitely a big trigger for the inner critic. So as you think about inner critic and explaining this to other people, it's negative, self-talk personified. So everyone has negative self-talk, but you're turning it into a character. You're making it small and silly. I love asking questions just about, like, what is your inner critic wearing? And, really encouraging your client to get creative. And there's almost a feel of brainstorming with it, where you could say, what if your inner critic was wearing a tutu? And then you see what they do. Like, what else would they be wearing? So you kind of help prompt them into creativity, especially if they're struggling. There could be, but ask it in a way of like, well, what if? Or let's say that your inner critic goes in the outfit change and comes out wearing something totally different. What would that look like? Because that can change the whole feel of it too. And actually, with my client that did the librarian, we put fairy wings on the librarian, and that was her breakthrough moment. She was like, she's not so serious. I can face off with her. But before that, there was not a breakthrough. So you really have to not only facilitate the conversation with the inner critic. What do you want to say to your inner critic? What does it say back? How would you respond? And so on. But also just like, what happens when you put the inner critic in a corner or in a box? Or what if the inner critic was upside down? What if the inner critic had a mustache? Just really playing with it and helping them tap into creativity. And that's why I've seen a lot of breakthroughs happen with inner critic, because they're building it up so big and so mean in their mind. But when you make it silly and funny, and they realize, wow, my brain can change this. Just like the story I shared earlier about something that really, really got on my nerves, the big wad of gum. Like, just looking at it from a different perspective is so powerful. That's kind of what we're doing here too, is looking at it from a different perspective. All right. Well, Mike.
So Hannah, can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe the goal of this exercise? Is it to disarm that inner critic, or to minimize it, or just to clarify and understand it?
It's number one, to identify the negative dialogue, and then to personify it with the goal of separating it from the person, so they are not their inner critic. The inner critic is separate. And then the last part, Mike, is to repurpose inner critic, because you can't shove it down. It'll just come back. You can't get rid of it. It might always come up, or it might change. But the whole point is to identify it, name it, and play with it, and repurpose it. So, like, for example, the librarian got a different job. Her job was to be a reminder instead of taking lists and being critical and shushing my client. So it's separating it from them and telling them and helping them realize they are not their inner critic. Because a lot of times, let's be honest, we beat ourselves up and we think it's us. But if we can separate ourselves from the negativity, and we can realize we can change it, we can do something about it. What do you think, Mike? Is that clear things up?
Yeah, that's helpful. And that was probably in this chapter, which I had read a few days ago. I just hadn't gone back to it. But the separation and repurpose, that's what I was looking for. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, and I think a lot of times people don't identify it. I think for a lot of clients, some people might need the repurposing more than others. Some people might really just need to isolate it and realize, wow, it's not part of me. I can do something about this. Just the realization, that's a lot of aha moments I've seen happen too. It's just, oh, I can do something about this. All right. Well, let's dig into this a little bit deeper with a demo. So does someone have an inner critic they would like to, you're all going to do this anyways, but does someone want to be coached on it first? I know I coached Eddie last week, and then Sarah, I think the week before that, and then Robin was a coach. Let's see. Mike, you mentioned that you had started brainstorming your inner critic. Are you up for it?
Sure. I figured you were kind of making your way to me. It sounded like so.
Well, I can ask Kellen.
Sounds like it's my turn. No, it's my. It sounds like it's my turn. That's great.
Thank you. All right. So I think we're in a good uninterrupted space. So that's the first step of this exercise. Mike, how would you say you do it? Stretching your imagination.
How do I do at that? How well do I do that?
Yeah. How would you say you do at that?
I think I like to think I'm above average. I think I was better at it when I was younger, and it's something I'd like to get good at again.
Yeah. If you were giving someone instructions on how to get better at using their imagination, what would you say?
Get rid of the fear, break open the parameters of how you see yourself. Knock the walls of that box down, and give yourself permission to think about yourself differently.
Those are really good points. Well, Mike, I encourage you to give yourself permission just to tap into your imagination and take that next step, because the exercise that we're going to do is very imaginative and creative and a little outside the box. It's called Inner Critic. Is that something you'd like to do today?
Yeah, that sounds really good.
All right, so just give you a little explanation of what inner critic is. It's negative self-talk, so that might be what you say to yourself in your head, or maybe out loud sometimes. That's negative, or a pattern. And the purpose of this exercise is to really identify that negative self-talk. We're going to personify it and kind of separate it from you, and then repurpose it. So we're really looking at habit change here. You might be in a habit of saying a certain thing to yourself, and that affects something that you do. And we're going to disrupt the pattern and almost kind of redesign that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it sounds like a great exercise.
Do you have any questions about the inner critic?
Oh, I'm sure they'll come up as we go through. Some things are not immediately clear, like what repurpose means. But I think the exercise of putting a personality and a personification around this voice would be really interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to give you an idea of repurpose, it's where you're not getting rid of the inner critic, but how can the inner critic serve you or be helpful to you? So,
okay,
for example, maybe inner critic that's really critical, maybe they help you just be really extra thorough on something. Okay, my inner critic is really good at seeing the angles I might be missing. So when I get this trigger, then I'm going to really tap into that and use it for that.
Okay, good. That's helpful.
Cool. All right. Let's get started in this. So I've given us a couple more examples of like my inner critic or that one of my client. Do you want any other examples?
I think we can go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. All right. So you mentioned earlier, Mike, that your inner critic tends to show up professionally. What does that look like?
Well, I think it often looks like a voice that questions whether I have the skill set that I need to be successful on a given project, given the subject matter and the set of clients that I'm working with, and the nature of the task that they've asked me to help with. The inner critic reminds me that I don't have I'm not an MBA. It reminds me that it took me 7 years to get through college, and I'm playing on a field of business people that that are very polished. very, very big companies, very well-known companies, very high levels within those companies. And so it just inserts some doubt. It inserts some, I don't know, frustration might be part of it when the answers don't come to me immediately, you know. I think it's doubt is just a really big part of it. But there's another word there that that's not coming to me. It's kind of a combination of frustration and doubt. It's a desire to break through and kind of win, you know. But an ongoing questioning is whether I have the skill set that it takes to get there, you know.
Thank you, Mike. All right, class. As Mike's been talking, what words that he said stood out to you? Or what words came to mind in your head as he was talking? Nothing came to mind for anyone? I got some words. So the whole point, like this part where is when you'd be listening for keywords. So what were you guys listening to? What did you guys hear?
I heard, you know, first of all, he prefaced it by why he feels this way, and it was the whole college thing. I mean, I heard that, and so there's that in there. I don't know what else.
Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, doubt was a big keyword through a lot of what you were saying. But also I just kind of noticed like their energy was kind of small and contained. Like you almost kind of looked like doubt. Like it was just like talking about it was like, it's hard. It's really hard to talk about things that are in your ear in a negative fashion. So you kind of get, I wonder if it makes you feel kind of small when you have something talking about negative things. But then at the end, you sort of came through with this little like, but there's also almost a piece of hope in that because you want to break through to something bigger. And so that was kind of cool too. Like maybe you like, it's like a little underdog thing. Like, you know, even though things are tough, you're also really strong and you're able to break through something bigger. I don't know. That's just my sense of it. But.
Great observation, you guys. I think asking, you know, what was it like for you to have to talk about that would be a great question because you noticed kind of his energy went down. And I think doubt is a really big word. Another word that kind of almost tied things together I was noticing was the word polished. And I want to ask him what it means to be polished. What I'm wondering is, does Mike, you know, that inner critic, not feel as polished because he doesn't have that MBA? What do you think, Mike? What does the word polished mean?
Yeah, it's a style that is pretty prevalent at really high levels within big organizations, you know. A style of talking, a style of walking, a style of presenting yourself. The people that live and operate at those levels very rarely say the wrong thing, you know. Their language, they don't stutter, they don't stammer. They're just very smooth and graceful in the way they present themselves. And it can be kind of disarming, you know. And I feel comfortable in those situations sometimes, and sometimes I don't.
When you're not comfortable, Mike, what kind of things do you say to yourself?
Oh, do I belong here? You know, am I going to mess this up? Are they going to be sorry that they hired me? Am I earning the money that I'm charging them? You know, am I earning my keep? Trying to think. Those are probably the main ones.
It sounds like a lot of questioning.
Yeah, I think it is more questioning. It's not necessarily you don't have this. You don't have what it takes. You know, it's do I have what it takes? It's not that I'm going to fail. It's what are the chances that I'm going to fail, and what would happen if I did? You know. So for me, it's definitely more questioning than overt negative pessimism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I noticed that it's not statements, it's questions, that the negative self-talk.
I think so. Yeah, in this situation, yeah.
Okay. All right. And at the core of this questioning, I heard, doubt, but it's almost like in the business world, you're questioning if you have what it takes, you're up to the same level as everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's level can mean a lot of different things. I know that I'm not necessarily at the same level from a credentialing standpoint. I don't have a whole lot of letters behind my name, you know. And the non-inner critic side of me says that doesn't matter, and that's what I truly believe. But the inner critic side of me wonders if it matters, and wonders if it matters to people who see me and notice that I don't have those letters behind my name.
Of all the questions, Mike, what is the biggest question? I've heard lots of different questions. So does it really matter if I have those letters behind my name? Am I going to fail? And so on.
Yeah, that's the big one. Yeah. Is this project going to crash and burn?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in your mind, what kind of person says or asks the question, is this project going to crash and burn?
Mm-hmm.
Now this.
Well, the word, yeah. What's that? The word weak comes to mind. A lack of confidence, and I'm describing that critic, not myself. It's silly, but I have an image of someone who's kind of very skinny, not very well kept, kind of stringy hair, loose, ill-fitting clothes that aren't very clean.
Okay.
Afraid of having put a stake down for themselves, but willing to sit back and point out the weaknesses on someone else's behalf.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So the backseat driver, or the armchair quarterback. A male, younger than me. For some reason, 20s or 30s comes to mind. Single, not very gainfully employed.
What degrees does your inner critic have, or if so, do they have any?
Yeah, not particularly, not many letters behind their name. Yeah, I don't see this inner critic as being very accomplished. Instead, it's someone who prefers to stay behind the curtains and criticize, rather than having skin in the game.
What does this character's skin look like? Because you mentioned his hair is streamed. What does his complexion look like?
Oh, it's awful. No, I'm just kidding. It's kind of muddled, pale, maybe a little bit greasy.
Okay. How are his teeth?
Oh, his teeth gross me out. Just middle of the road, It's got a certain Gollum quality to him.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Okay. So that begs the question then, what does his voice sound like?
Yeah, it's not particularly, it's not booming. It's not bassful. It's kind of whiny.
What kind of accessories does he wear? You mentioned dirty clothes, but does he wear any accessories?
Yeah. Well, he's kind of wearing baggy, ill-fitting old khakis without a belt. Although he needs one, definitely dirty shoes, dirty tennis shoes that are not athletic, have not been worn down through being athletic. They've been worn down just because he doesn't know the difference. I don't know about accessories. He might have a watch on, but if he does, it's not. Might be one of those old Casio push-button calculator watches, I don't know about glasses. If he might have glasses, if he does, they're outdated, bulky frames that are a little bit crooked.
Okay. What is his scent?
His scent?
Yeah, his scent. What does he smell like?
I don't want to get that close to him. I don't think it goes so far as to say that he's has really poor hygiene. I don't see him that way. Yeah, I don't know about that one. I haven't spent much time thinking about other men's scent.
No worries.
I don't have a lot of adjectives to draw from.
So far, we have kind of almost a slacker, really skinny, lanky, Gollum-looking character here with greasy hair, kind of a greasy face, you said too. Really worn clothes, kind of out of date, kind of what you described. You said behind the curtain, so kind of maybe criticizing but not really participating himself. Are there any other details to your inner critic?
I think that's a really pretty accurate. Yeah, took that further than I thought it might go. No.
Okay. Well, let's mix it up just a little bit further. And I do want to acknowledge you, Mike, for being really creative in trusting this, because I know it's a little out there. I want you to picture your inner critic as we've described him, and I want you to put a sombrero on him. What's that like? What does that make you think of?
Oh, it diminishes his strength and his power significantly. It exposes him because he can't pull it off. Not physically pull it off, but he can't. He doesn't have the confidence or the style to wear it in a way that's funny or attractive, it just makes him look silly in a bad way. There's good silly, there's bad silly. This is bad silly. It diminishes his power, and it I don't know, it almost maybe embarrasses him a little bit in a way that he can't recover from.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you tried to separate that sombrero from him, what would you see in place of it if you can replace it?
If I can replace it?
Yeah. What would be in place of it?
Well, it would depend on my goal, whether I would want to make it, improve it, or develop it further. You know, if I put kind of a nicely worn, but kind of stylish, narrow-brimmed Western hat on him, it would significantly increase his stylishness, because it would make all the rest of his clothes kind of fall in place, you know. If I put a stocking cap that's pretty worn from a sports team that I don't respect, then it would reinforce all the things that I talked about before. You know?
What sports team would that be?
Oh, now I'm just going to get in trouble with somebody if I say that. Yeah, it could be a number of them. Who would it be?
I guess you could say a color if you want to protect everyone's feelings.
Yeah, kind of a dirty baby blue, you know. Not a bright, sunny baby blue, a dirty, dusty, kind of worn, frayed.
Okay. All right. Well, how do you feel like we did at getting a picture of your inner critic?
Oh, that's pretty clear. I hope I can sleep tonight.
Why do you say that?
Because I don't want him hanging around in my head. I don't want that image hanging around.
Okay.
He's not somebody I particularly like, you know.
Okay. So instead of, I want you to imagine in your mind that you are putting him, I don't know, on a roller coaster that gets stuck. What's that like? So he's on the roller coaster and it just gets stuck and you can leave him up there.
Yeah, it's a giggle for a minute, but then the compassionate side comes out too, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody for too long, you know. I wouldn't want to be up there. And I don't think he's done anything necessarily to deserve any kind of punishment or pain. Mm-hmm. He's being who he is, you know.
Okay. I just want to share something with you, Mike, if that's okay. I noticed that when we put the sombrero on him, you showed compassion then. You were almost like, oh, I don't want him to feel that bad about himself. He won't be able to recover. And now here, thinking about putting him on a roller coaster to get stuck, you don't wish that on him. Mm-hmm. Then this is the same person that is making you doubt yourself. So it's questioning, like, what will happen if I don't get this project done? Or I don't have enough letters behind my name. But I'm really curious why you have such a compassion for your inner critic.
Well, I guess because I don't feel ill will or a need to or a desire to hurt anybody, you know, kind of to that point in my life. I want to, my whole vision, my whole attitude right now is around helping. I try to be that way anyway. I guess I recognize him as part of myself, and so don't necessarily want to cause harm to or cause pain to. I mean, we're describing him as somebody else, but I also feel like he is an element of my own personality that we've just given form to, you know. There's some self-protection there, I guess, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could understand how you're feeling some connection, but just so you know, Mike, this exercise is totally separating it. It assumes that.
Separating, right.
So, just so you know, that's where I'm coming from, because I would never want to make fun of you or anything like that as well.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, and that's what you said early on, that it's a whole thing about separating him from myself. Yeah, I think that's hard for me to do. But even if it was an entirely different individual, unless they caused harm to my family or something, I just don't have that kind of antagonism or wish for harm for anybody.
Well, what's interesting, Mike, is that you don't even want him to be embarrassed. Did you notice that?
Who likes to be embarrassed?
All right. Well, this inner critic, you have a clear picture of him. You have a heart of compassion for him. There's a sense of almost protection of your inner critic. So this inner critic, what would be his name? This golem-looking.
Yeah, Wesley or Sheldon or something like that.
Could anyone see Wesley in a whiny voice? Like, it totally sounds like it. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I was just thinking of other names. No.
Mm-hmm. Wesley or Sheldon?
I mean, there's parts of them that I respect and care about, because maybe in that sense, and maybe I'm thinking about it too broadly, but that inner critic is also a source of motivation and has contributed to certain successes, you know.
So you see what you're doing there, Mike?
Challenging.
You see what you're doing there? I'm gonna
keeping him close to me.
Well, no, you're repurposing him. You're talking about, well, this is the benefit of having this inner critic. So you'll notice that a lot of times clients end up already naturally that's the repurposing. Like, well, what are they good for? Maybe they're not helping me in this area. It's a negative, but what could they be positive in? And you pointed out motivation. Okay. All right. So I'm going to let, when you go to breakout rooms, to continue this, but I'm really curious. You can say one thing to your inner critic, maybe in response to when Wesley or Sheldon, whatever you want to name him, when he says, you don't have enough letters behind your name, and he's peeping out from behind the curtain at you and saying that to you in a whiny voice, how do you respond?
Yeah, but I got 30 years behind my name. That's what I always tell myself. I don't have the letters, but I've been doing this one thing I'm in my 4th decade now. You know, I deserve to be here.
How does it feel to say that?
Oh, it feels good. It feels emotional, you know. At the tail end of this aspect of my career.
How could you more fully embrace those 30 years?
More fully embrace them. Oh, I think it's around acknowledgement that you know, that long in the trenches is just as deserves just as much credit as 4 years in a classroom, if not more. You know.
Well, I could definitely keep going, because I was interesting, Mike, because I thought of the word acknowledgement too when you said motivation, like that. Maybe you're
recognition, acknowledgement. Yeah, giving ourselves that gift, you know, to accept that, congratulate ourselves, you know.
Okay. Well, this isn't the end, because as you notice, we took a lot of time just around describing your inner critic, which is a very important part of this exercise. So when you go to breakout rooms, you can dig into more of the description, but then get to the end of the exercise, really digging into discussing like discussing the negative dialogue with your inner critic and create a new way for you to relate to your inner critic, which you're already kind of on that path. So wherever you feel like there's a need with that, I would design that with who you're going to be working with.
Okay.
What was that like for you, Mike?
Oh, it was quite the journey, you know. It went deeper and wider than I thought it was going to. It's something that sounds kind of simplistic on the surface, but once you get into it, it takes on a lot of power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge you. It seemed like you were really present with it, and you were just connected the whole way through. You didn't like kind of dip out. You were fully engaged, and that's really hard to do with this exercise sometimes because it is emotional and there is a lot of like that negativity, and when you personify it, sometimes we can back away. But I just want to acknowledge the fact that you stayed like up front and engaged the whole time, and I thought that was really cool.
Thanks. Well, I appreciate your help.
All right. Well, class, we're going to go and practice this ourselves. But before we do, does anyone have any comments or questions or? Okay. All right. Well, we're going to spend, let's see, we could take the next 25 minutes or so. I'll say 26 so everyone can have an even amount of time. And I'll be in breakout rooms with you guys, but key point is, take that time around description and just really encourage your client to tap into their imagination and enjoy the exercise. And then you really want to get to the root of the negative dialogue. So for example, with Mike, it was the letters behind his name, but there was a lot of other things. So I actually asked him, what's the biggest question? And just really getting down to the root of it. And then asking, what kind of person would say that? And he'd already been imagining, but it's a really good way to segue into that when you just ask, what kind of person says that? What do you see? And just remember, keep it small, keep it non-threatening. Maybe even, keep it silly. What would make them almost diminish that inner critic's power? All right.